Good morning investors, my name is Thomas and this is Tuesday's market wrap. Starting with the US indices, they all closed in the red overnight after a bumpy session. A lot happened on the weekend, but let's start with the global economical news. Looking at the US-China trade talks will reach a pivotal phase this week when Chinese Vice Premier Liu He comes to Washington for negotiations with his US counterparts. US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and the US Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin. The two sides are trying to resolve differences over China trade and intellectual property practices, industrial subsidies, and market access to avert an increase in US tariffs on Chinese goods scheduled for March 2nd. Here is a look at the key issues in the talks and their implications. The biggest controversy between Washington and Beijing is about years of steadily rising US trade deficits, with China and US complaints that Beijing has systematically obtained American intellectual property and trade secrets. Through coercion and outright theft, the Trump administration last year demanded fundamental changes to China's economical model to allow US companies to compete on a more level playing field. Everyone's leaning in to discover what's at stake at these talks. The simplistic way to put it is, the most basic level, a dominant position in future high technology industries. According to the US Trade Representative's office, China is determined to upgrade its industrial base in 10 strategic sectors by 2025, including aerospace, robotics, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and new energy vehicle. The two sides could report some progress towards a deal through another standoff on core structure issues would be viewed as a negative sign for a deal by March, and investors would brace for higher tariffs. But trade negotiations often go down to the wire, so a final outcome is likely before the end of February, and any agreement will need the approval of Trump and Xi. If enough progress is made, the two sides could also decide to extend the deadline and keep negotiating, as often happened during talks last year, to replace the North American Free Trade Agreement. Donald Trump has finally backed down over the border wall, agreeing to put a temporary end to the partial government shutdown. But it comes at a cost, with many of the president's allies walking away feeling outplayed after a 35-day lapse in funding. 2 days after the record-long shutdown ended, the White House made it clear overnight that Mr. Trump is prepared to shutter the government, again without any border deal from Congress. His standoff with the Democrats on Capitol Hill is far from over, and the clock is ticking. The spending bill Trump signed on Friday's funds the government agencies that had been shut down for 35 days only until February 15. It's unclear if the Democrats will budge. US jobs report. The US Labor Department will provide a picture of domestic employment with the release of the January jobs report. Economics polled Thomas Reuters expects to gain 160,000 jobs after a blockbuster December. When the economy added 312,000 jobs, the report will offer clues on the pace of the US economic growth and the possible impact of the partial shutdown of the federal government. The Feds will do their rate meeting on Wednesday. The US Central Bank's policy setting board, the Fed Open Market Committee, will conclude its two-day meeting on Wednesday. Officials expected to hold rates steadily after raising them in December for a fourth time in 2018. The Fed has signaled it will increase its rates twice this year. Now, looking at Europe, we acknowledge that the US weren't the only ones that closed in the red. Looking at the Europe indices in Europe, that we saw the CAC, FTSE and DAX in the red also, which is great and bad news. But now looking at Brexit, in the UK, members of Parliament are due to give an interim verdict on Prime Minister Theresa May, Brexit's Plan B, on Tuesday. But a second meaningful vote may happen not until early February. Crucially, members of the Parliament will also vote amendments which would determine the process for agreeing a deal, thereby forcing the Prime Minister's hand. One crucial proposal by the Labour's Party, Yvette Cooper, which has a strong chance of being passed, would reduce the chance of a no-deal Brexit by giving members of Parliament the right to request an extension of the formal Article 50 divorce process. If the government has not won parliamentary approval for its Brexit deal by February 26, will close. Now, looking at commodities, we did see gold in the positive. We just saw silver up 0.5%, gold up by 0.40%. We saw crude oil down by 2.81%. Brent crude down by 2.61%, and we saw the appreciation of the Australian dollar hit 72 cents to the $1 US. And that's all for today's market wrap. I hope you had a lovely weekend. Thank you.